What were the similarities and differences between the Korean War and the Vietnam War? That's what you should be able to answer by the end of this video. So we're going to briefly talk about each war, and you might want to take some notes as we go through so that at the end you can compare and contrast them. Now, the first thing you need to know about both the Korean War and the Vietnam War is that they were known as proxy wars. So a proxy war is when a third party gets involved in another person's war. This was part of the Cold War, and the United States and the Soviet Union get involved in both of these wars to further their agenda in the Cold War. And hopefully you remember that the United States, their agenda was to contain the spread of communism, and the Soviets wanted to spread communism. All right, so the Korean War starts in 1950 and it lasts for 3 years. So it's just a few years after World War II ends. The Korean War begins when North Korea invades South Korea. So after World War II was over, Korea was divided along the 38th parallel. Now, the 38th parallel is a line of latitude. If you remember from your grade school days, lines of latitude and longitude, 38th parallel is a line of latitude. Above the 38th parallel, Korea was communist, and below the 38th parallel, Korea was democratic. So the Soviets backed the North, and the West backed the South. Now remember, when we talk about pro-Western or the West, that comes up over and over again. The West refers to Europe and the United States. Okay? So the reason that the United States got involved in the Korean War, which was a civil war between North Korea and South Korea, this tiny, tiny little country on the other side of the world that most Americans could not find on a map. Why are we sending soldiers there? We're doing it as part of our policy of containment, meaning we want to stop the spread of communism. So if North Korea wins this civil war, Korea will become a communist country, and we want to stop that. So we're going to help South Korea in this war. Unfortunately, this war goes nowhere fast. Very quickly, the war stagnates along the 38th parallel. So at certain points, the South made some headway up north. Other times, the North made some headway south of the 38th parallel, but neither side made major advances. So President Truman, who was the US president at the time, wanted to de-escalate this war. It wasn't going well. It was really kind of a quiet war. It didn't get a lot of press here at home at the time, but the president saw that it could become a bigger and bigger problem, and he wanted to de-escalate. But there's a famous general, General MacArthur, who was in charge in Korea, and he felt the opposite. He felt like if we sent more soldiers, more weapons, and we just came down hard, we could take down North Korea. And he actually did not listen to the orders of President Truman, and he was fired for insubordination. Once General MacArthur is out of the picture, President Truman starts peace talks. And in 1953, after 3 years of fighting, 5 million people are dead, 40,000 American soldiers included, an armistice was signed. An armistice is basically a draw. You agree to lay down weapons. So today, Korea is still divided. North Korea is communist and South Korea is democratic. Now we're going to cover the Vietnam War in a couple of minutes. The Vietnam War, if you look at the years, 1955 to 1975, a much longer war. Now this war gets started slowly, it escalates, it de-escalates, but it lasts for a total of 20 years. Vietnam is in Asia, not far really from Korea, and Vietnam is divided. North Vietnam is communist, South Vietnam is not. This will be a civil war. North Vietnam will invade South Vietnam and try to make the whole country communist. This is the North Korean communist leader, Ho Chi Minh. It was his wish to bring the whole country together and unite it as a communist country. So America is going to be fighting against Ho Chi Minh in the Vietnam War. So we joined the war. Why? Again, tiny little country, other side of the world. Why are we sending our boys over there to die? Well, number one, policy of containment, same as North Korea. Also, there was a theory held by some here in America called the domino theory. There were politicians who were afraid that if any little country fell to communism, that others would fall behind and keep falling. Just like a set of dominoes, when you hit one, they all fall down. That was a fear here in America. So that's why we got involved in Vietnam, a tiny country on the other side of the world. So troops were sent throughout the years, throughout the 60s. By 1967, we had half a million U.S. soldiers fighting in Vietnam. The casualties by that time were about 15,000 killed and over 100,000 wounded. This war got a lot more press than the Korean War. It's the 1960s, it's the civil rights movement, there's a lot of upheaval in our country at this time, and there were many Americans who did not believe that we should be involved in the Vietnam War. They believed that it was a civil war in a little country that had nothing to do with us, and that we should get out of the war. 250,000 Americans walked on Washington, D.C. in 1969, demonstrating against this war. So in January of 73, President Nixon orchestrates the removal of American soldiers from the war. So we withdrew our soldiers from the war in 73, but the war was still going on. North and South Korea, Vietnam were still fighting, and without America's support, in 1975, the North won the war. So today, Vietnam is a unified country, and it is a communist country, one of 5 communist countries in the world. Okay, so there's North and South Korea, North and South Vietnam in a few minutes each. So you should be able, if you jotted down some of the facts that I talked about, you should be able to create a Venn diagram and compare and contrast the two wars. Some of the things you'd want to consider: which side was communist, which side was democratic. How long was each war? How did each war end? Why did the U.S. get involved in each war? How did Americans react to each war? And finally, what are the effects of the wars today? Okay, some of those things both wars will have in common, others will be unique to each war. And hopefully you did well with that. So now it's time for a riddle. What happens to a frog when its car breaks? Oh, What happens to a frog when its car breaks? It gets towed away. Get it? Towed. Towed is another word for frog. Are you laughing yet? No? Too corny? I keep trying with my corny riddles. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope that you learned something today.